Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
Super.
And I can see you nicely. All right.
Okay.
So, okay, our next speaker, who I have the pleasure of introducing, is Joanne Newton, showcasing South Africa. Joanne is a program manager working in English for Education system for the British Council in South Africa. Joanne has worked in North America, East Asia, the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and Sub-Saharan Africa as a trainer of teachers, and more recently as an education advisor. Without any further ado, over to you, Joanne.
Okay, thank you. Well, I sound like I must be 100 years old with all those things I've done, but can you put my slides up?
Your slides are here. You can
Okay,
just
it's after this
use the arrows.
sheet. Okay, I see them. Okay, hi everyone. I'm Joe. I'm not South African, nor am I British. I'm actually a Canadian who works for the British Council in South Africa. I'm married to a South African, so I've been here quite a while. Um, I just wanted to give a disclaimer in that, this presentation is on the challenges of multilingual primary learners. I'm not South African. I'm not multilingual. I don't speak, well, I'm bilingual, but not multi. I don't speak an African language. I didn't grow up under apartheid. I don't really have firsthand experience of colonialization and things like this. So, I'm really just kind of delivering some overall messages about South Africa. So I wouldn't want to actually speak for the people who are multilingual and who are kind of experiencing exclusion in South Africa because of their language. So with that disclaimer, let me get started. So the arrow. So I'm sure you all know a little bit about South Africa from, the World Cup in 2010 or other things in the media. I'm sure we all remember 1994. So South Africa has a very progressive constitution, and there's actually 11 official languages, which you can see there. Um, but of course, English is the dominant language in South Africa in a number of ways. It's only a first language for about 5 million South Africans, which is less than 10% of the population. But 90% of South Africans speak English as a second or another language. English first additional language, which is your English as a subject, begins around grade 1. But English is a medium instruction for many, many learners. The large majority begins in grade 4. English is the dominant language of business, media, education, government. Um, so it has a lot of power amongst these 11 languages you see here. Okay. I'm not sure if you know, but there are quite disappointing educational outcomes in South Africa. So the PEARLS assessment, which is the Progress in International Reading Literacy Study, actually puts South Africa as one of the lowest in terms of literacy in the world, well, at least among the countries that do the study. So actually 78% of South African grade 4 children can't read from reading in their first language, in their mother tongue. And the Department of Basic Education report on English first additional language, the last one there in 2014, found that 80% of schools underperform in English first additional language, which is English as a subject. And then a large percentage, more than 50%, but actually I think much more than that, of young people in South Africa are NEET, so not in education, employment, or training. So these are, major concerns to everyone who lives in this country. South Africans or people raising their children here in South Africa, like myself. Well, actually, my children are South African. Just me, I'm not. So a few important quotes to consider when we're looking at language and education and learning. The first one, Africa is the only continent where the majority of children start school using a foreign language. And then Williams found that such language policy is a significant contributory factor to the lack of development in the continent. Speaking a language that is not used in the classroom holds back a child's learning, because if you don't understand, how can you learn? So for this reason, multilingualism, which actually I think we all here know is an amazing strength and asset to an individual, actually starts to provide a barrier to learning for children in the classroom. Yeah, so I mean, English as a medium of instruction actually becomes a choice of parents and school governing bodies in South Africa. So there actually is a very kind of progressive language policy that allows children to learn in their first language, is the language of learning and teaching. And if a school nearby doesn't offer that, then there's actually provisions that can be made that children can get that support. But unfortunately, many parents, school governing boards are misguided, and they think that having their child learn in English from a very early age is going to help them in the future. But actually, I think we know that's not helping if they can't understand what's being taught in class. For some, English is the language of learning and teaching does enable achievement, but for many it does not. And the growing body of evidence shows that children learn best in a familiar language, and an early move to English medium of instruction actually increases dropout rates and also repetition of grades in schools. So the British Council, along with DFID, UN, USAID, all encourage mother tongue-based multilingual education at the primary phase. Okay. So the British Council's position is in line with the behaviors and values of the British Council, and it's based on the kind of do no harm principle. So we believe that young learners succeed when they learn through their first language, and that a non-first language curriculum forms a barrier to learning. So you can see that that picture there of the children watching the baseball game, and you can see the fence there provides a barrier. So if we imagine that the child on the right is the one whose first language is not being used as the curriculum, we can see that the fence, the barrier, that is the curriculum. That is the curriculum that's not being offered in the child's first language. Ideally, on the right, each child is learning in their own first language, and in the middle, there's provisions being made where the curriculum and the language of instruction still is a barrier, but some provisions are being made for the child. So obviously the ideal situation is on the right, but often in the middle, the British Council finds that we're working. So for example, in South Africa, we should be in a situation where children are learning in their first language. However, I guess with 11 official languages and lots of multilingual classrooms, it's not always the case. So often we find ourselves working in the middle, trying to make provisions and work with government and work with policies to make sure the child is supported as much as possible. Okay. So I want to talk to you about a project that is an inclusive education project, and I actually manage this project full-time. So it's called Teaching for All, and it is a curriculum and material development project for the most part. And it's an inclusive education project, but it's looking at inclusive education in a broad way. So I think for some people, they think inclusive education is around disability and special needs. And of course it is, because those children are the most likely to be excluded from classrooms, not only in South Africa or Africa, but globally. But it's actually much broader. It's looking at the kind of intersectionality of diversity. It's looking at social justice. It's looking at all the different barriers to learning that exist. And by barriers to learning, I don't mean things that are wrong with the child, or things that prevent within the child that prevent them from learning. That's not the case. The barriers are things around the child that are preventing the child from engaging. So it could be the curriculum, it could be the language of instruction, it could be the teacher, it could be the culture of the school, it could be so many things. So this project looks at removing those barriers so that children can engage in learning. And particularly, we are working with Bachelor of Education and PGCE programs to put inclusive teaching at the heart of their offer. We're actually working with 20 out of 23 universities in South Africa to make sure that this project is mainstreamed. Oh, and this project is funded by the European Union, for which we're very grateful, and also the British Council. So there are kind of 4 main deliverables to the project. So I'm going to talk to you about them, specifically about the language and the multilingualism and inclusion element of each. But the background and research, with a university leading, we did a kind of broad scope of the inclusive teaching competence, skills, and attitudes of South African pre-service and in-service teachers. Then we're using those findings to inform the module material development. So we're making a 24 credit, which is 240-hour module for universities in inclusive teaching, of which multilingualism and language and culture is part. We're implementing these at up to 23 universities. We've got 20 on board now, via grants of 10,000 euros, so the universities can take the content and make it their own. And then we have quite a significant M&E piece, because this is a project where we are working at scale, because we actually also are working with the provinces on a CPD add-on, but we're working across an entire education system. We have a very good education researcher leading our M&E team from the University of Sussex, who also works in South Africa, to see if this kind of intervention can work in other countries. Okay, so the research report I told you about, I mean, this is a really simplified list of the findings. This is like a 150-page report. So for those of you that are, MA and PhD type people, this report will be available on the 5th of December and on the British Council South Africa's website. And you can read the whole thing, the research plan, strategy, framework, see the tools, see the data analysis. I'm giving you a very simple summary of the findings. So what the researchers found, that South African teachers have some understanding of inclusive education in theory, although they tend to see it as disability rather than broad inclusion. That their training lacks relevance and practicality, that the curriculum allows little time for reflection or mistakes, and that language and literacy are seen as a major exclusion factor. Now you might think, considering the PEARLS assessments and the other results I told you about earlier, this would be obvious, but it's actually not obvious. It's not something that gets focused on as much as it needs to be. But of course, to the British Council, this is something that we really strive to, improve. Inclusive education is not usually core, and there's a lack of clarity about who's responsible for inclusivity. And for us, in Teaching for All, that's all of us. The community, the parents, the teachers, the policymakers, we're all responsible to make sure children are included, according to their needs and their welfare and their rights as well. So the implications from those things for course design, the really important one here, and we're addressing all of these within our intervention, but the one in red, if you care about the inclusion of all children, according to Sustainable Development Goal 4, about equitable and inclusive education, then you have to care about language and literacy. So that's what I'm focusing on for this presentation. So let me show you a bit of what we're doing. So, now that, I don't know if your graphic looks as bad as my graphic, but it doesn't look great, the pink one. when we put it on the screen. But anyways, that's a graphical representation of the curriculum development we're doing. So there is a 24 credit BED PGCE module at NQF level 6 to 7, which is, I think, the same as the UK, similar to the UK qualifications. There's 3 versions. So a primary version, a kind of middle ages, but older child, younger teenager version, and then an older teenager version. And these are available both online and in print. And there's also these, more academic and more student-teacher focused modules being adapted for in-service use. Now, the good thing for you all here is because these are, developed using EU money, they're going to be open educational resources. So when we finish in March, everything will be broadly shared, and anyone in any country can take these materials and adapt them for use in their own country. Now, there are 4 main units, which you're supposed to see in the lighter pink in the middle, but they are inclusive teaching and learning policies. So that's kind of the context of exclusion. So in South Africa, very much leading from the many, many years of colonialism and apartheid, going on to what happens today with social, economic, and linguistic exclusion and all of this. And then all of the kind of inclusive education theories and models like, Bronfenbrenner and the social model, which I showed you before. Then there's a section on learner diversity and intersectionality, and that's where the language part comes. There's a part on inclusive schools and communities, so working in collaborative partnerships and your responsibilities as duty bearers to children. And then there's a very large unit on inclusive pedagogy, so inclusive teaching and learning practices in the classroom. So focusing in on this second unit on learner diversity, we start off about what learner diversity is, what intersectionality is, and what equity is. So, we are all many, we are all different, we are all many things, we all have different strengths and weaknesses. But despite that, and actually because of that, we all deserve to be welcomed and engaged in the classroom. So after getting that across, we move on to focus on 2 areas that we found through our research really, really impact on children learning in the classroom. One is language and culture, and the other is non-visible differences. So non-visible differences is the kind of psychosocial or neurocognitive things that you can't usually see. I mean, you can see, obviously, from my colleague's presentation earlier, you can see poverty. You can see, different types of, neurocognitive differences. But in general, when they're not extreme, sometimes teachers don't pick up on it. So when they see, that Tabo or Jane or whoever is not behaving in the classroom, sometimes they think he's naughty, but actually maybe he's hungry, or actually maybe, he can't see the board, or actually maybe he saw something really horrible on the way to school and he's traumatized. So non-visible differences is about getting teachers to look beyond the exterior and try and really understand what's preventing children from engaging in the classroom and learning. But anyways, obviously I like that area, but I'm going to go back to specific outcome 2, which is the language, culture, and learning. So we had 40 hours of content, and it actually doesn't seem like a lot. I would love to do like a whole 200-hour course on this. Maybe we'll get the opportunity, I don't know. But written by Professor Lizzie Milligan and Professor Zubaida Desai. Now, Lizzie, I think, is from Bath in the UK, and then Zubaida is here from the University of Western Cape, and they wrote together. So this unit is really important within inclusive education because it actually is something innovative. You don't often see language and multilingualism being approached like this in this body of work. So the main aims of this section of content are to demonstrate how understanding language and cultural diversity contributes to access, acceptance, and participation in inclusive classrooms. So access, that they're actually allowed to go to the school, acceptance, that their language is seen as equal value, and then also to participate. And then also there's a number of practical strategies on how to create a language and culture inclusive learning environment in your own teaching context. And I liked, Virginia's comments about how this can be applied in so many other countries. They are global concerns. Like when I think of classrooms in cities in Canada, I mean, we take 200,000 new Canadians every year. I mean, that's a lot of people. So I think it's like 30% of the population is their parents were born in other countries. And I think we know all over the world this is happening more and more. So yeah, it's definitely an issue in South Africa, and it is a serious issue considering the outcomes that our children are experiencing. But it definitely can be applied to other countries. The summative assessment of this unit is to develop a language policy and plan for the school while you're making the policy, and the theories and research and evidence that underpin this. So it's got to be, remember, it's for a BED, so it's got to have some, academic rigor to it. I think when we adapt this for the CPD part, we might not go too much into the theories and research. We might just, keep it at a more practical level. I'm going to show you just 2 tiny pieces of the material. So this is like I think a 60-page piece of work. So I just pulled out 2 snippets that I thought we could look at. Oh no, before that, actually 3 snippets. So this being the first snippet. So I thought this was a really useful thing to consider. Now the writers put this forward as guiding questions for teachers and guiding questions for this unit of our module. So looking at language and the impact on quality education and inclusion. So making sure that you as a teacher are not putting a barrier there for your child, and that you're rather removing that barrier or giving the provisions. So is the learner taught and assessed in a language he or she understands and speaks well? Does learning and teaching draw on the learner's prior experiences and resources to construct new knowledge? And are teachers proficient in the language of learning and teaching? And these 3 questions will tell us the kind of level of inclusion or exclusion that the child is experiencing. Okay, so a first activity, I told you a little bit about South Africa's language and education policy. So as I said before, children actually have the constitutional right to learn, choose their language of learning and teaching, but often in a misguided attempt to, English is aspirational and English is important. There's no doubt. And if parents want that for their children, they should have the right to provide that to their children. But using English as a medium of instruction at this early age, provides these barriers. So anyways, using this enabling language and policy, how could you as a teacher assist learners to access the curriculum if the pedagogical will is there? So in groups of 4, demonstrate how you can assist learners to access a difficult part of the curriculum by drawing on their mother tongues. So what we imagine, imagine a university lecture hall with 100 student teachers. Imagine the lecturer puts this up on the PowerPoint, and the teachers, probably are coming from many diverse, cultural and language groups within this room, that they come together in the lecture hall and they start thinking, okay, what's a difficult part of the curriculum? I'm teaching grade 4, so let's talk about, cell reproduction. I don't know, something like that. How could, what languages are we going to have in our classroom? How can we use those mother tongues to help the children? So, the teachers should be thinking, through their own strategies, as opposed to being given like a list of tips and spoon-fed, how to do it. Another one, before, we do give specific strategies. It's not like we don't give any at all. But here is an activity looking at how you can celebrate multilingualism in a classroom. Because, a lot of inclusion is about having the attitude so that you see multilingualism as a strength. And the word celebrate, to be honest, can be a bit cheesy, like when we're always celebrating diversity and multilingualism, when it's just normal. It's just a fact of life. So anyways, but multilingualism is a resource and it is an asset. I mean, if you're multilingual, there's quite a bit of evidence that you probably have, much higher developed cognitive skills in many regards to someone who's monolingual. Um, let alone the kind of social and cultural and economic resource that different languages have. Um, so, we want teachers and classrooms, to really see multilingualism as an asset, as opposed to just something that gets in the way and let's all teach in English. And too bad for the kids who don't speak English well enough to access what's going on. So they give some examples in the material on how to encourage learners, learning the greetings of each other's languages, celebrating Mother Tongue Day, developing multilingual resources, either the teacher or the students, and using that as a starting point. Okay, so I'm coming near the end. I really don't know how the time is going, but the Teaching for All project is a 3-year program. And all of these resources will be available online in 2019. So if possible, I'll try and share them through the YLTSIG Facebook group. So if any of you want to download them, you can. And the report will be available in December. You can see my email address there, and you can see our webpage if you need anything else. Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge again that the work was done by Lizzie and Zubaida, and then also Caroline Grant, who's our project director, has done a significant amount of work in English medium of instruction that I have used for this presentation, and also to recognize the funding by the EU and the British Council for the work. And in the end, in all of the languages of South Africa, thanks very much. And I'm done.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe. You can just summarize some of the questions, or you still have like 2-3 minutes. And if you have any questions, please type in the chat box.
If you want to connect with me, you can use my work email. I am on Facebook, but I'm not like good at like work Facebook posts and promotion. I need to get better at that. But please send me an email and I'll send you everything. But I'm on LinkedIn. Sometimes I post good work stuff on LinkedIn, so you're welcome to find me there. Is 3 years long enough to implement the project? Well, we're in year 3 and we are under the pump, as we say in South Africa. We are going to finish our project work by the end of 3 years, but we're actually approaching the EU for an extension on the impact evaluation, so they have more time to monitor the implementation. And also the universities are doing a staggered implementation plan through to 2020 and 2021. So we'll just be able to evaluate, bits and pieces. But luckily, we've got government partners, so there's ongoing sustainability in that, the Department of Higher Education and Basic Education are ultimately accountable for the work once our funding stops. And I'm sure the British Council will, keep working to assure this area of language and inclusion in South Africa. If second language is the barrier, how to teach second language to the beginners. I mean, I think what we're putting forward for primary is that learners should learn in their mother tongue, and that if you're using a language that is not their mother tongue, that language is the barrier. So in the case of South Africa, where English is being used, way too much as the language of instruction, you know, where we come in as well are, you know, different techniques to then bring
All right, Joe.
multilingualism
Thank you very
into the
much. Thank
classroom
you
where
very
English is
much.
the
Lots of
medium
good
of instruction.
ideas and
Like
really,
remember
really
when we all
very good
started
to hear
teaching and
them from you.
everyone had these
And we're
English
gonna
only
continue
policies,
with
you know,
Joseph,
especially when it's
who is
not language as a
representing
subject, but it's like the
Congo.
language of
Let's have a break
instruction.
for 5
That is
minutes
really
and
not
then we'll
helpful.
continue. Thank you
So
again,
you
Joe. Thank you
need to
very much.
let learners use their first language in class.
Bye.
Yeah.